Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on the evolving role of LNG in Europe. We will slowly getting started. More people are dialing in the meantime. But my name is Bart Verreke. I'm working also in the gas, hydrogen and retail department. And I will be your host in opening and closing this webinar. So if we move to the next page, so today we will have three main blocks actually. We have the webinar itself with the LNG market. It's a second edition of this report. As you probably know, our monitoring reports are a long tradition in ACER, and they cover by now a vast number of topics going over electricity, retail, gas, hydrogen, and also LNG. So our two colleagues, Pedro and Ricardo, will give you a brief overview on some of the main facts and findings of this second edition. It's a rather expansive report, so I invite you, if you have not done so, to have a look at it. It's an interesting read for sure. And then we will have a panel discussion with two external speakers, Kenneth Faux from S&P and Alberto De Frutos from Naturgy. And Chilla will moderate this. She's leading the department. We'll also have some time for Q&A. For that, if we move to the next page, we have a specific system. Maybe you're used to it already, but we are using Slido for that. Here you see some instructions on how to use it. There are various options to enter it. So this is the way we will be using the Q&A session, and also like questions, so then they move up higher in the ranking. Maybe if we can briefly move up again. So this webinar will be recorded, so just for you to be aware of that. And also we will be publishing it afterwards, so you can read again or have a look at it again. So the report is already out since last week. You probably have seen the press release, and also it was also in the press by some agencies. So, but before we get going, Christian will give you a brief introduction, a broader view. Christian, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Bart. Let me just check you can hear me okay before I...
Yes, we can. We can.
Very good. Thanks a lot. Yes, good morning, everyone, from sunny and warm Ljubljana. As Bart was alluding to, our market monitoring is a long-standing tradition at ACER. This is the second year that we have a volume solely dedicated to LNG. We have chosen to do that, obviously, because of the rising importance of LNG for us in Europe. It links to many different issues, the future outlook for gas demand, which of course has some elements of uncertainty to it. It also links to near-term issues around Russian energy flows, particular gas flows, which are currently split, let's say 50-50 between pipeline and LNG volumes, as it were. Links to the rising share of US LNG, very significantly rising importance of US LNG for our markets, and of course also broader price volatility trends. And indeed, on the latter, what I would add here is that increasingly at ACER, we're trying to look at the interplay of electricity and gas, where we'll see over time lower bulk volume of gas in electricity generation, but an outsized influence in terms of flexibility provision, not least seasonal flexibility. So there's an element of volatility in that interplay by virtue of the changing nature of electricity generation, yes, but also by virtue of our significant reliance on spot markets, also for LNG volumes, which we will turn to in a second. And of course, LNG being part of a more global market will often be subject to what we see are sort of more traditional cyclical dynamics of global commodity markets. And this links also to the fact that given a number of different elements, less and less EU will be the flexible swing market, or the market of last resort, as we refer to it, as it has traditionally been in the past, probably leaving that role for Asian markets somewhat in the future. So this element, this outlook, is not an easy one to navigate for decision makers of different stripes, whether they're governments, market players, regulators, or others. And of course, our aim with these market monitoring series is to help inform deliberations and choices by all those decision makers. So hopefully, if you stay with us for the next roughly 54 minutes, if you invest that, we'll guarantee, or almost guarantee, a sound return on investment. And I'll turn to the first segment, as Bart was saying, to Pedro and Ricardo to take us through some of the main elements of our LNG market monitoring report this time around. So Pedro, Ricardo, please take the floor, and I leave it to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Pedro Céspedes. I'm the lead LNG analyst at ACER. My role includes leading ACER's LNG price assessment and the monitoring of LNG market developments. And I'm pleased to be joined today by my colleague Ricardo Fernández, co-author of this report we are presenting today. As a way of introduction, a 2025 LNG monitoring report comprises 3 chapters. First one covers dynamics in the global LNG market. The second chapter focuses on LNG trade, including the analysis of the EU LNG contractual position and insights from ACER's LNG price assessment. And finally, the third one describes the important role of LNG terminals today and the important role they will have in the future. So starting with global dynamics, we'll be presenting some highlights on both supply and demand. Looking at 2024, there was a limited growth in LNG production. Only 4 BCM of additional LNG production mainly coming from Russia. This was due to a strong LNG output from Yamal liquefaction plant, which is precisely the facility responsible for the majority of the Russian LNG supplies to the European Union. There were also declines observed in Algeria and Egypt due to feed gas limitations and increase in domestic demand. New LNG capacities coming online. During 2024, there was around 14 BCM of new capacity. Largest contributor of this capacity was Arctic 2 in Russia. The remaining additions came from Fast LNG Altamira in Mexico, Congo Floating LNG, and the bottlenecking of 2 projects. Each is in Australia and Freeport in United States. It is important to highlight here that a massive expansion, despite the massive expansion of LNG production capacity is underway. However, since 2022, annual capacity additions were on average around 15 BCM, similar to what is expected for this year, for 2025. It won't be until 2026 when new production capacity significantly is going to ease the market tightness, with annual production capacity expected to increase by more than 40 BCM per year, reaching up to 60 BCM in 2027. So here is a visualization of bilateral trade of LNG between countries. LNG flow patterns have been traditionally been underpinned by long-term commitments, infrastructure investment, but also geopolitical alignment. However, the recent rise in trade taxation and protectionism policies introduce a new layer of complexity and uncertainty that could drive a significant change in the existing flow patterns. During 2024, the United States was responsible for supplying nearly half of the EU LNG imports, followed by Russia with a 22%, and in the third place, followed by Qatar. Also, to a lower extent, Algeria, Nigeria, and Trinidad and Tobago complete the list of main LNG suppliers to the European Union. Over the last decade, and especially since 2022, there has been a significant shift in global LNG trade. European Union emerged as the largest LNG import market globally, ahead of China and Japan, and during 2024 continued to be the main LNG import market, despite a 17% drop in LNG imports, or 22 BCM less compared to the previous year. On the production side, or export side, since 2022, the United States took over Australia and Qatar as the largest exporter of LNG. The drop in LNG demand in the European Union, together with the drop in the UK, only around 30 BCM, was largely offset by increased imports of LNG in Asia and other price-sensitive regions. China led the growth in demand with an additional 9 BCM, followed by India with 5 BCM, and to a lesser extent by Egypt, Brazil, and others. This section is about LNG demand and the role of LNG infrastructure. Here, one important message that is going to be developed further during this section is the value of LNG import terminals should be measured beyond the metric of utilization rates. But as I said, this is going to be developed in further detail during this section. So the evolving role of LNG in Europe, as illustrated in this figure representing the matrix of EU gas supply, is gaining traction and gaining importance over this decade. The Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 accelerated the shift away from Russian fossil fuels, leading to a surge in LNG imports as a more flexible and geographically diversified supply source. As a result, LNG's share of the total EU gas supply nearly doubled from 23% in year 2020 to around 40% in 2024. So the aforementioned drop in LNG imports has impacted definitely into member states, being France, Spain, and the Netherlands the ones with major reductions compared to the previous year. Also, the way and how LNG imports are distributed across member states has a direct impact on the behavior and utilization of LNG regas terminals. That will be explained in further detail by my colleague Ricardo Fernandez in the next slide. Ricardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pedro. As Pedro mentioned, the LNG imports will have an impact on the utilization of the LNG terminals in the European Union. The LNG terminals provide multiple benefits, system-wide benefits to the European natural gas system, and such as the flexibility in the system, relieving price pressures during the energy crisis in 2022, 2023. And since the energy crisis, there has been an additional around 60 BCM of LNG capacity in the LNG terminals. Around 2/3 of this capacity corresponds to floating storage and regasification units. In 2024, the LNG utilization was marked by low utilization levels in all member states compared to the levels achieved in 2022 and 2023. And on the right plot, you can observe in the red line that LNG use declined during the summer 2024 because of the high storage levels achieved in April at the end of the heating season 2023-2024, thus reducing the need for LNG imports in order to refill storages during the summer. However, the LNG use rebounded in the last quarter of 2024 when the colder weather caused higher gas consumption. Can you please move on? However, the LNG terminals offer a strategic value beyond the typical utilization metric defined as the ratio between the LNG central float and the regasification capacity. We mapped not only the LNG central flow in this figure that you can see in the slide and the LNG regasification capacity, but also we relate these metrics with the annual gas consumption for every member state. If you want further information about the figures, you can read the report. This gives another perspective beyond this utilization metric, just looking at the ratio. And we would like to stress that it's important to analyze these utilization metrics based on a detailed analysis for every country. The LNG terminals provide different roles, which sometimes are complementary. For example, they complement underground gas storage facilities to handle seasonal demand variations. They serve as the key supply source for meeting peak demand where storage is limited or absent. They provide base load pipeline supplies, such as in Belgium, France. They enhance interconnectivity within the European natural gas market, and they enhance the supply diversification. Transversally, we shouldn't forget the security of supply role they provide to the natural gas system in general. So these roles, as well as the ratio of LNG import capacity versus the total system demand, will impact the terminal's annual and peak utilization rates. Can you please move on? One example of fostering competition through diversification, which we can analyze, is looking at LNG terminals altogether in the Central and Southeastern European region, including the LNG terminals of Germany, Poland, Lithuania, Croatia, and Greece. In the plot, we can see the share of LNG exporting regions in these Central and Southeastern European LNG terminals. Next to each bar, you can see the number of exporting countries, and next to these numbers in blue, you can see the LNG import volume, the total one, from 2016 until 2024. We can observe a higher reliance on LNG in this region since 2022, increasing, for example, from 3 BCM in 2016 to more than 20 BCM in the last couple of years, which improves supply security in the region. We can also see an increase in the number of exporting countries from 3 in 2016 to more than 10 after the energy crisis in 2022. And if we take a look at the last bar corresponding to the year 2024, the US now supplies about 2/3 of the region LNG imports. However, the United States diversity of market players is higher than, for example, in other exporting regions. LNG terminals benefit not only the coastal countries, but also the landlocked countries, such as an example could be Bulgaria or Austria. And therefore, it is essential to remove any further bottlenecks in the natural gas network in order to enjoy the EU-wide benefits. Can you please move on? So one of the most important questions in the report is the evolution of the LNG contracts until the end of the decade. In order to analyze this, we need to assess the LNG needs, and we have relied on two decarbonization scenarios. On the one hand, the Fit for 55, which sets a legally binding target of reducing 55% of the greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels, and the REPowerEU plan. The REPowerEU plans to cut the Russian fossil fuel imports via 3 different strategies: savings, diversification, and deployment of renewables. Some of these targets, the solar PV installed capacity, the wind installed capacity, the number of heat pumps installed, and the biomethane production, can be easily tracked down. And we have compared the 2024 growth rate in the figure that you can see here in yellow to the growth according to the 2023 data in green, and the new growth according to the new data, 2024 data, in purple. Based on this plot, we can conclude that the solar PV is on a strong trajectory to meet the REPowerEU target of 600 gigawatt by 2030. However, the rest of the targets are not on track. For example, the current deployment of wind power and heat pumps falls short, and it would be needed an annual growth around 14–16% to reach the targets by 2030. Unfortunately, meeting the 2030 goals for having 20 million tons of renewable hydrogen is unlikely, and having 35 BCM of biomethane production could be difficult. All in all, by 2030, we estimate that the gas consumption could drop to 190 BCM if all targets are met, except those for renewable hydrogen, which appear out of reach. The main takeaway, this slide is quite important. It's difficult to digest at first glance, but the main takeaway is that the LNG demand uncertainty range is estimated around 90 BCM by 2030. On the left plot, we provide the demand trajectory for the two mentioned scenarios, the Fit for 55 in blue and the REPowerEU demand, and comparing the demand and the expected supply, we can assess the LNG needs for both scenarios, which these LNG needs are represented in the right plot. We have taken into account also the phase out of Russian gas imports by 2027, following the REPowerEU roadmap. And on the right plot, we can observe that under the REPowerEU scenario, there is a decreasing, decreasing trend of LNG needs, reaching 50 BCM in 2030. And without stronger decarbonization efforts beyond the Fit for 55, the EU could face up to additional 30 BCM of LNG demand compared to the 2024 levels, arriving to around 140 BCM. In summary, there is an LNG demand uncertainty range around 90 BCM by 2030, which is widening from now until the end of the decade, and therefore it is essential to keep track of the decarbonization progress of these and the objectives set by the decarbonization scenarios. So the floor is yours, Pedro. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. So here we have the one of the core analyses of the report, the contracted position of the European Union. So once the LNG needs are identified according to the decarbonization scenarios, we wanted to find out what the reliance on the spot market would be in these two cases. For that, we've looked into the long-term contracts with the intended destination is the European Union, and will be active in this timeframe up to 2030 to build up the contractual level. So this is represented by the two blue bars, where light blue represents FOB contracts and yellow represents desk contracts. So the gap between the expected LNG needs and the contracted level is the volume that most likely would be traded on a spot basis, which is represented by the white bars. So that is also called reliance on the spot market or exposure to the spot market. So in the Fit for 55, this is expected and reliance on the spot market ranging between 40 to 60 BCM, while in the REPowerEU, this reliance on the spot market almost disappear by 2027, 2028, reaching an overcontracted position since then. So thanks to the flexibility behind FOB contracts, these volumes could be delivered elsewhere the European Union. So due to the uncertainty range of 90 BCM in LNG demand between the two decarbonization scenarios that my colleague Ricardo showed before, and considering that some technologies are not on track to achieve REPowerEU targets and will require faster deployment, we wanted to illustrate an additional reference point for future LNG demand. This is not a third scenario, it's just a midpoint trajectory equally distant to the two scenarios, REPowerEU and Fit for 55. So in this case, we can observe that considering future gas demand in the midpoint trajectory, reliance on the spot market remains significant with limited improvements before 2030. Here in this slide, we have a comparison highlighting the exposure of the top 5 LNG importers to the spot market in 2024 and beyond. In 2024, the EU spot LNG purchases reached around 30 BCM, more than double the exposure to spot of China, the next largest buyer. This significant reliance on the spot market is mainly driven by the EU's rapid shift away from Russian fossil fuel. But looking ahead, future LNG demand in Asia remains uncertain as well. However, China has already secured significant long-term volumes growing by over 40 BCM and exceeding 130 BCM in the coming years. In contrast, the EU contracted volumes are projected to remain flat around 80 BCM. So in this section of the presentation, we wanted to share some insights on the daily EU spot LNG price assessment ACER is conducting since 2023, as mandated under the emergency regulation, which was later extended to 31 December 2024. And since 1st of January 2025, LNG market data is being collected by ACER under the legal framework of REMIT regulation. Although price volatility has improved substantially since summer of year 22, intra-year volatility remains high. As we can see on the right-hand side, the price gap between the highest and lowest spot LNG transaction narrowed in 2024, driven by a drop in the maximum price from 92 to 67 euros per megawatt hour. However, if we look at ACER LNG daily price assessment, the figure on the left-hand side, the overall daily price volatility has increased. So ACER assessment shows that daily EU spot LNG prices range from 22 and 66 from March 2024 to March 2025, compared to a narrower range of 22 to 48 during March 23, March 24. ACER assesses over 550 spot LNG transactions with delivery into the European Union during year 24 for a total volume of 45.5 BCM. If we look at the EU LNG imports that were purchased on a spot basis, this was 31 BCM, that implies a churn rate of 1.5. Meaning that based on the trades reported to ACER, spot LNG volumes for EU destination were traded at least 1.5 times before final delivery. As already highlighted in the first edition of this monitoring report, ACER tracks the pricing indexation used in EU spot LNG trade. And while TTF is the primary benchmark for pipeline gas in the EU, it also dominates spot LNG pricing. In year 2023, 64% of spot LNG volumes were indexed to TTF, but this share has increased up to 33% in year 24 at the expense of other European gas hubs like PEC, ZTP, or MVP. Finally, to conclude, there's a final section of the presentation focused on ACER recommendations to address the uncertainty around future gas demand in the context of decarbonization and to mitigate the risk price volatility due to the reliance on the spot market. ACER proposes a dual strategy. This includes accelerating decarbonization while securing additional LNG volumes through flexible contractual arrangement. So accelerate decarbonization to reduce gas demand and secure additional LNG supply. Here the approach would be structuring new contract volumes in short or medium term, or alternatively flexible contract if that is the case of long-term agreements. Essential component of this dual strategy is the improvement of monitoring of the decarbonization progress, enhancing coordination between member states and European Commission. So this will help to reduce uncertainty around future gas demand, leading to more informed decision on the need for additional LNG volumes. And it will also support the early identification of technologies that are not progressing as expected, enabling policymakers to intervene with targeted support measures and policy adjustment. That is all from my side. Just a quick reminder, you can submit your questions in the end through Slido. We'll be happy to address them during the Q&A session, which will follow right after the coming panel discussion on decarbonization and LNG contracting, flexibility, risk and opportunity. This section is going to be moderated by Cilla Bartok, head of the Gas, Hydrogen and Retail Unit at ACER. Cilla, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to the both of you, Pedro and Ricardo, for the insightful presentation. And now we are moving to a very interesting panel discussion, which will continue to open up a couple of issues that would relate both how we would manage on the European Union decarbonization and how we keep at the same time LNG security intact. So my privilege today, and I'm calling the panel, is to introduce two guest speakers who will get the floor in a minute. I will start introducing Kenneth. Kenneth Faux is Global Director for LNG at S&P Global Commodity Insight. He has joined the company in 2013, which is based in Singapore. Kenneth leads Platts pricing, content, and methodology coverage of LNG markets across all global regions. And Kenneth, I would like that you open your camera, which I don't know whether it's...
The camera is open. Sheila, please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much. And our next speaker panelist is Alberto de Frutos, who has extensive experience in energy regulation and energy management across electricity and gas sectors, including LNG optimization. He is presently Director for Regulatory Affairs at Naturgy, a leading energy company in Spain, which is well recognized for its LNG operations. Alberto is also a member of the board of Eurogas, a Brussels-based association for gaseous energies in Europe. And with that, then I would like to then start the discussions. And I'm turning to Kenneth, although I don't see your camera, Kenneth, but that may be on my screen. So Kenneth, what is your assessment about the current and near future market developments for LNG? And could you also make some reflection about the Asian markets as well as your area of expertise?
Thank you, Sheila. I'll just very quickly like to thank ACER for inviting me to this panel discussion and to really congratulate ACER for such an excellent report being produced. I wanted to give some observations on the markets, both based on this report and also from some reflections from attending the World Gas Conference in Beijing last week. What I think is one of the most key topics is the summer injection season, and we are seeing that it's a really key moment to monitor the development between the Asia LNG, which is JKM, versus European LNG arbitrage. As for the summer, Europe continues to look to LNG to replace Russian gas, and Asia procures LNG cargoes to meet its cooling needs. What we have seen so far this year is that strong supply in Europe for LNG has resulted in a widening of this European LNG price spread against TTF, with this gap around 50 cents or so on average this year. So we think that both basins will be, very susceptible to a cold winter, especially if, post-summer inventory build-up doesn't really occur in a big way. I think another key observation as well is that in order to replace 16.7 million tons of Russian LNG, from Yamal, as well as additional gas imports, this is quite a monumental challenge. And our research teams do assume that you would need new projects in the US, for example, Plaquemines, from Corpus Christi, LNG Canada, Golden Pass, and even Qatari's NFE facilities to have strong production that far exceeds any demand growth from China, India, Thailand, and South America. So it's this assumption that needs to be made. But also on the demand side, you need to assume that gas consumption in Europe can be managed with renewables that can come in and replace gas. So I think the key message is that Europe will still need to outcompete Asia in the long term for volumes, in particular US, and that needs to be done on a pricing basis, whether it's a tight market or a well-supplied one. We have also seen that there's a lot of talk about term contract pricing last week in Beijing as well, around how Henry Hub and crude link contract pricing continues to be sort of a safe haven for certain end users, both in Europe and Asia, looking to sign long-term contracts. But there's a little bit of a risk there because ironically, these two benchmarks could inject some volatility into contract portfolios. What we expect is that US gas prices could have some significant upside risk due to the double whammy of LNG demand, as well as AI data center power consumption, which could again create that 2019-2020 scenario of US cargo cancellations. And of course, we've all seen the weak Brent outlooks by various market observers. That could also be a concern for LNG suppliers, particularly those in the Middle East. And finally, I just wanted to briefly touch on how the physical and the spot trading volumes as well as derivatives volumes have really surged in the last year or so, and really highlighted the evolution of how LNG has grown as a trade. What we do expect is that as supply rises this year to 2028, we would see, of course, prices start to moderate, a lot greater demand, a lot more spot liquidity, and shorter term contracting, up to 5 years, could be something that European importers could consider more in order to have a measure of flexibility in terms of risk management.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, for these insights. I think it's interesting to look at a bit ahead at the fundamentals, what's happening with supply, and then what kind of consumption regions we have, how those evolve, and then how we would need to compete as European players. But coming to that, Alberto, I would like that you make some reflection about how you see the situation in Europe, also in light of the decarbonization targets, how our markets are shaped. What is your view?
You're on mute, Alberto. If you can unmute you first and restart. Thank you. It's still not working.
We'll wait a couple of minutes. Now it works. Yes, we will wait. Yeah.
Okay.
So the floor is yours.
Sorry for that. Thank you very much, Sila. So first of all, I want to congratulate ACER for the in-depth analysis shown in this report. It's really impressive. My compliments to the team. I will start referring to demand projections, which is a point well covered in the report. I think a very touchy one. And as it is clearly reflected in the report, the European Commission has proposed various decarbonization strategies along the time, notably within the frameworks of Fit for 55 and REPowerEU, very different outputs regarding gas consumption in the years to come. It's clear, and as I said, well reflected in your report. However, I would say the debate over which decarbonization pathway will be the most efficient for each sector, I mean, it's a specific application, transport, housing, industry, etc., for each geographical area. I think it really goes far beyond this particular two forecasts, and this is an open debate that will be evolving, especially in a context where technological and cost uncertainties remain very high. So we will have to keep discovering what the paths of decarbonization will be in the future. But it is worth noting that the REPowerEU scenario it significantly departs from the principle of technological neutrality. That's very understandable given the context under which it was created. It was at a time where there was a clear risk of security of supply of gas in Europe, and that was the whole focus of this scenario. But in my opinion, a decarbonization exercise, any that could be proposed today in this very different context where we are, should lead to different solutions. And that would imply, in my opinion, a certainly higher gas utilization and therefore higher LNG demand. So the focus, of course, should be again on decarbonization at the lowest cost, rather than simply reducing natural gas consumption. That was the focus of REPowerEU at the time. And this is something that has to be well considered. So while electrification is certainly part of the solution, there are other technologies, including renewable gases such as hydrogen or biomethane, that are also expected to play a significant role in the energy mix in the next years. So again, the pace at which these technologies are deployed will have also a strong impact in the need for LNG for the European market. And in summary, I would say while uncertainty around LNG demand in the decarbonization process does exist and cannot be entirely avoided, I would fortunately argue that it is not as broad as the report might suggest. I would say it's well reflected what these streams are, and it's very useful to point that this is an issue. But fortunately, we are not facing such an enormous uncertainty, and we have to be glad about that. So in light of this reality, the question is, how can the European market cope with the supply of an uncertain demand? And the report presents us recommendations that range from reinforcing demand reduction, going to flexible contracting, or even some regulatory intervention. Without disputing any of these approaches, what I would propose is to look back and consider how the international LNG market has, in a record time, succeeded in meeting the gas supply needs for the European economy. It managed to increase its contribution from 21% in 21 to 37% in 22, just in 1 year, and to 43% in 2023. And then a slight decrease in 2024 to 112 BCM, reducing a significant amount of 22 BCM from the previous year. And how has it been possible? Well, it has been possible because the LNG market, the global energy market, is a highly dynamic market that has multiplied its volume tenfold since 1990, fivefold since year 2000, and it's expected to grow by more than 30% in the coming years. But to achieve this, the global market had to adjust its consumption, resorting to short-term, more cost-efficient supply alternatives in other regions, using and resorting to other energy sources. And that's how this was possible. There's no doubt that this enormous effort came at the cost of significant price tensions in the international LNG market, and of course in Europe, in order to attract the vast additional volumes of LNG that were required. However, and I think this is important, this should not mislead energy policy decisions, as the situation has been clearly exceptional. We have put the market to an enormous pressure, and this is not the way it's going to behave in the future. So this is not the grounds under which one should look at the future in relation to the role of gas in the decarbonization process. But going forward, I would say that this experience helps to reduce the perceived importance of demand uncertainty. The market will certainly need to adjust to the evolving demand, but it will do so at a global level, where effects can be better balanced out. It's not just doubts about European demand, but it's all about global demand, and their efforts can go in different directions. So there's a benefit of being in that global market. And in any case, the expected annual volume changes that we would see in Europe will be far smaller than those that we have seen in the recent years. So we have already passed through the most difficult process. Just
maybe Alberto, if you could.
Sorry.
If you could conclude, Alberto,
yes,
so that I have the chance still to ask one question to the two of you. Yes.
That's the point, touching that we're here talking about LNG. This would have been very surprising some 4 years ago, where I would be talking about internal market. Internal market means developing the rules to trade gas within the union, and now we're referring to something which is broader, which is bigger than us, which is out of our scope, and it has a lot of benefits in terms of the connection with the market. And here I would say that is gives an advantage for European regulators because this connects to two different markets and a broader one, and gives a lot of transparency and a lot of references to the market. And this which should ultimately help simplify regulatory oversight. And this, I would say, for both regulators and market participants. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you very much. So I'm coming back with one question because we have to also be aware of time, and I would also like to give the opportunity to the audience so that we would pick up a few questions from them. So if I'm turning back to Kenneth, I would like to ask you, and both of you, Alberto and Kenneth, you were mentioning more flexible, shorter and medium-term contracting. So Kenneth, what are the distinct factors that influence Europe's and Asia's contracting behaviors? Could you say a few words about that?
Thanks, Sheila. I'll just give a very quick answer to this. I'll say that for Asia, the contracting activity is longer term because it's focused on the longer term goals of replacing coal with gas, and also to maintain fast economic growth in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, and then in China, as well as in South Asia, where you have India and Bangladesh and Pakistan. Whereas Europe is focused on a much shorter term goal of replacing Russian gas and LNG while preparing for renewables and other future fuels. So that's the main difference. One is a longer duration and the other is a shorter duration. It will also mean that portfolio suppliers and trading houses will tend to find more willing buyers in Europe for some of these shorter 5 to 8 year contracts. There's also more preference by Europe, I think, to sign more FOB contracts because the primary supplier would be from the US, while Asia is still comfortable signing these DES contracts. I think China and India don't have concerns over that. But I do think that FOB volumes does give Europe a lot greater flexibility than their Asian counterparts, especially when they need to regulate some of these volumes due to changing demands, and they have to resell some of them to other regions. And I guess one last point is that in terms of pricing, what we have seen is that for Asia, anything that less than 5 years, Brent and JKM are typically the key benchmarks of choice. Whereas for Europe, you do still see TTF as the preferred option, although there's still quite a lot of demand for a European LNG pricing option.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. Please also turn on your camera. And I'm also asking in the meantime that Pedro and Ricardo also just turn on their cameras, because then we will soon move to the Q&A session. But before that, Alberto, I would like to ask about the methane regulation. So we understand that as of August 2028, importers will be required to report the methane intensity of LNG import contracts, those ones that were signed renewed after the 4th of August 24. What challenges does this new regulation pose to the market, and what role do market players and institutions play?
Good. Without a doubt, this is a regulatory measure that is going to create, and indeed is starting to create difficulties for the LNG supply to Europe. It's important to consider here is that in the case of LNG, for logistical and optimization reasons, short-term trading is very intense. So here the grandfathering clause that was provided for pre-existing contracts either does not have full effect or forces suboptimal trading practices leading to inefficiencies. And I think really talking about methane emissions and LNG, this is a very critical point that I think was not well considered when this regulation was approved. The regulation attempts to govern activities that occur clearly outside Europe and therefore beyond the reach of European legislation. And to do it, it has imposed obligations on importers who clearly do not have the full capacity to comply. And here the support of European institutions, most notably the European Commission, is essential to create the necessary conditions in exporting countries that would enable compliance with the regulation, particularly but not only by advancing the process of recognizing the equivalence of MRV practices. While the objective is clearly not in question, the pace of implementations appears clearly ambitious, which is further complicated by the still lack of clarity regarding the application details, both at the European and national levels. And in the context of a ban on gas imports from Russia, of course, this regulation is will have inevitably implications for security of supply in Europe.
Thank you very much. So with this moment, we close the panel and we are moving on to the questions. Feel free, Alberto and Kenneth, to chip in depending on the questions. But the first question, as I see, will go to Ricardo and Pedro. And then the question is about that we were mentioning gas network bottlenecks. Can you please expand and mention which bottlenecks you identified in the report?
Yeah, I will answer to that question. There are still remaining bottlenecks according to one of the latest ACER congestion monitoring market reports. These bottlenecks were identified in southeastern Europe and northwest Europe, especially the flows from west to east. So these bottlenecks is important to handle them in order to have access. I mean, in order for this LNG to come to landlocked countries. So ACER usually releases this report annually. So we are expecting to have a new report in the coming year, probably. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. The next question could be something that all of you could contribute to. And it goes like this. Do you expect European utilities to increasingly sign long-term contracts to hedge against spot volatility, or are the decarbonization targets a hindrance in this context? So I would leave you to come in. So the question is, whether we can sign long-term contracts, and then would the decarbonization targets be a hindrance to it? That would be high level the question, and that would be the last question that we are asking in the webinar. Pedro.
I would like to react to this question. Whether utilities will enter long-term contracts or not, it depends on it's an internal decision, depends on their strategy, but also the existing portfolio of LNG contracting, the future plans for growth. Decarbonization, the big question here is at what speed are we meeting decarbonization targets, and that uncertainty is that does not help to make long-term commitments. That is why one of our recommendations was to point to short to medium-term contracts as well. Yeah, that's.
I think. Thank you very much. I think that's to the point, and this is what we were proposing in our report. I would still ask one more question, which would then lead us to the conclusion. The use of the rate of LNG terminals is already low in the EU. Why European countries still building or planning to buy new LNG terminals? That's the question, and this is where we should be closing then. Please provide a short answer to this question, which is very intriguing.
Yeah, so I think it's important. There are multiple benefits from the LNG terminals, and I think it's important to take everything into account. So the LNG terminals not only provide LNG supply, so supply of gas to the countries, but also security of supply, as I mentioned before, baseload pipeline complement to in some countries. Most importantly, seasonal balance, the balancing of the natural gas system across seasons. So altogether, has to be put in the same bucket in order to make informed decisions.
And also, if I made any future development of capacity should be analyzed case by case. It's something that we recommend in the report as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you, the panelists, Kenneth and Alberto, and thank you to you, Pedro and Ricardo. Now I'm turning to Bart, who will make the final concluding remarks at the end of our webinar. Bart, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Foremost, I want to thank the two panelists for making the time and for their some interesting contributions. For example, I remember, or I will take with me, that Alberto put some of the recommendations in a critical lens. And a second one that is that regarding LNG demand and demand uncertainty, given the lessons from the energy crisis, where we rapidly could change the supply of gas, is that this offers some reassurance also for regulators when they have to, yes or no, intervene in the market. And also that it's a global market. We should not only look at it from a European lens. From Kenneth, I took also various points that, yes, for LNG, it's Asia and Europe that are competing with each other on LNG cargoes to reach our shores, and that price will be obviously the critical element. And given that we depend a lot on LNG going forward to the coming years, we should be mindful of that. There were many other comments on this, but I will leave it to that. On the report itself, I thank Pedro and Ricardo for the presentation, and also for the whole team to work on it, and also for the national regulators in discussing with us and the elaboration of this report. As you know, they are our closest partners. Yes, the market is tight on LNG. This has been amply shown to us, so we are really dependent on that. And we also showed various scenarios and what it would mean for contracting spot versus long term, and what are pros and cons. Obviously, all of that is a very balanced matter for companies and governments to consider. And Christian, in the start of the webinar, also highlighted that the role of gas is changing. Over time it will reduce. It's already less in demand, but given the rise of renewables, solar and wind, they are setting actually when gas is online. So these are a couple of points that I would take from it. Maybe there are still various questions unanswered. Maybe we can have a look if we can answer a couple of them more in Slido directly. I don't know if this is feasible for us to do, but I would also like to thank you for joining in a large group to this webinar. I find it instructive, and I hope it was useful to you as well. And once again, I thank especially our external speakers for their time and valuable insights. So have a good day, and see you during one of our future events, and keep our website, LinkedIn and other media where we are publishing our new insights and things that we are doing. So take care. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.